And so, with that, I think I would like to stop. I promised I wouldn't be long in my introduction, and welcome our first speaker, the Reverend Dr. Hillary Raining. If we were in the sanctuary, I would be sharing her credentials as a member of the clergy, which I'll just mention in passing. She's the rector of St. Christopher's in Gladwin, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia, where she was the first woman rector of a large parish in the city of brotherly love. She's also the holder of advanced degrees from Drew University in Yale. She's the founding director of the Doctor of Ministry at General Theological Seminary, and then the list goes on from there. But what I'm really excited to actually share with you is that in addition to that, she has founded an online spiritual and wellness community called The Hive, which I believe some of you are familiar with. She is a certified yoga and meditation instructor. She is a beekeeper. She is a certified forest therapist. And on top of it, she is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Native American Chippewa. So we're in very good hands today. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to Hillary Raining.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction, by the way. Can I get you to come with me everywhere? You didn't even have to look at your notes. That was fantastic. Friends, I am so delighted to be with you here today. We're going to do a couple of things in this first part, and it's going to take kind of a shape of a little bit of history, a little bit of spiritual practices, a little bit of understanding where we've been and where we might go, especially understanding the role of sacred femininity within religion, but then also how we can learn from those things to have spiritual practices for our life now. So to do that, I'm going to just basically start by giving us a brief introduction of the entire history of women in Western Christianity up until this point. Does that sound fine? Sound good? We can do that in a few minutes, right? You might just call it Toxic Masculinity Ruins Religion Again. You might just call that, right? It's the long and short of it. That's the introduction. You know, we have a fascinating journey because I think typically we look at religion and we see the patriarchal structure that's a part of it, and we think to ourselves, it must have always been like that, or that must be the dominant story. In fact, when we really look at the roots of both religion and many of the spiritual practices that we enjoy today, we find that there's actually much more of a balance between masculine and feminine that is so much at the root of it. And it's more of a modern invention that we have stopped seeing that as a part of practicing spirituality, right? And at its heart, religion, which is why we're starting with that in any way, is because it's a practice of the spirit, right? Like religion isn't just about a system, it's the practice of the spirit. So we're going to take a look at where it starts, at least in the Abrahamic tradition, where we see God described in many, many different ways. But one of the most important and earliest ways comes from Exodus, where God is described as being both almighty and full of compassion. Have you heard that before, perhaps somewhere? Yeah, almighty and full of compassion. Now, in the ancient Hebrew, what you hear in that is that there is the masculine mighty, right? They use the masculine pronouns for that. But then the compassion, this word compassion, actually has its roots in the Hebrew word for womb, W-O-M-B, womb, right? They're very related. So the idea of that one of God's chief attributes, even early on in the roots of the Abrahamic traditions, that is a God of compassion that gives birth, right, as a mother might, right? Then we hear throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Testament and into the New Testament a place for women in the conversation. It often gets eclipsed by things like seeing women who are not able to have children as less than other women. It's often eclipsed by the patriarchal stories that get wrapped up in it. But what we end up missing is the fact that in those stories, women were often named, which was not the common custom for many of the ancient myths, and that there were actually rules about how to protect women and women's bodies in a lot of the laws that were handed down to Moses. That's often missed because those laws were then reappropriated to try to control women's bodies, in particular things like menstruation. Any woman who was menstruating in the Hebrew tradition at the very earliest days would have had to go through a ritual cleansing process afterwards. And why this is important is because how that was taken later on, especially in puritanical viewpoints, was that was somehow because the woman was dirty in some way, ritually unclean. In fact, the purification rituals, there were plenty for men as well. It was a way of saying, actually, all of us can always be restored in our bodies and in our souls and be brought back to God, even in the natural cycle of things. Right? A different way of seeing it. Same story, all there in the literature, but very different. We're going to fast forward a little bit. Like I said, we had to get through this fast. We see in the New Testament as well similar sorts of stories where women and women's bodies are in this complex dance with a God that seems to want to actually lift up all people, struggle with the society that doesn't see women as full participants. So one of the best examples is the story of the hemorrhaging woman. And for those who don't know this story, it's found in the Gospel of Luke. In this gospel, there are more women that are named than anyone else. And one of these fascinating stories is when Jesus is in this large crowd and he is touched, the hem of his garment is touched by a woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years. That word hemorrhaging, by the way, is it's code. It's code for a woman who has essentially had a flow of blood for 12 long years. And it says right in there, things that we might recognize today, that she had spent all of her money on doctors trying to heal her. She had been sent out of the temple who said that she was unclean, and now she is desperate. She's in this crowd, she reaches out for Jesus' hem, and Jesus feels a bit of power flow from him. And he says, "Who touched me?" Right? And he is and gives her dignity and heals her immediately. What ends up happening in this exchange, what modern feminist scholars will say in this, is that Jesus is able to enter into her life by having something flow from him. And she's able to enter into his life by feeling that healing power. So there's this balance. Again, we see this masculine and feminine dance, right, already there. This keeps going in Christianity. Long after we hear of the gospel stories and the Jesus stories, etc., we start to watch Christianity evolve in the West. And the way women's bodies were treated at first were a part of the story as full and equal parts. What do I mean by that? Well, we know from the earliest Christian documents and history and historical sites that women's bodies were included in even the architecture. We see in the ancient baptismal fonts that many of them are in the shape of things you might expect, a cross, a tomb, things like that. But actually, there are some that are in the shape of a womb, going right back to that womb-like version of God's expression, right? So what you did was, if you were going to be baptized, you walked through this womb-shaped font, and then you were then lifted out. It was a full immersion, and you were now born as a new Christian, right? So they took the metaphor really, really seriously of Holy Mother Church, right? You were actually birthed through her. And on top of that, we know that there would have had to have been at least female deacons in the earliest churches, because women and men were baptized naked. And you would not have done that with a man or a woman if you weren't of that same gender. So we have it in not just the archaeological data, we have it in the artistic data, and we have it in some of the New Testament material itself. All of that, the good and the bad, the balance, we also see when we hear the story of Mary Magdalene in the earliest church communities. Mary Magdalene was seen as not just one of Jesus' closest followers. Her title, Magdalene, was actually also seen as a honorific, that she was the tower. And that name, the tower, that's what Magdala means, was given for the disciple who most understood the teachings of their disciple, right? Jesus only really gives titles of that magnitude to two people. One of them's Peter, the rock, and one of them is Mary, the tower. Why is this important? Because most of the liturgical tradition that is wrapped up around Peter tends to be baptism and Eucharist, and the other rites are the ones of healing that tend to go with Mary. Things like laying on of hands and anointing, even things like exorcism, right? The spiritual healing, the spiritual practices that we might think of are of that matriarchal line. And as those happen, what we see almost immediately is they start to kind of get downgraded from the other sacraments. So you can see how this starts to get codified really quickly within the spiritual practices of the Western Church. So where are we going with all this and why this matters? Well, we are in a shift right now, and I'm sure many of us can feel it, where we're starting to finally look at Western Christianity and say, there are some things here we definitely love, there's some things here we need to shift pretty dramatically to reclaim some of that sacred feminine. And instead of thinking that we have none of it in our roots as our spiritual practices, we actually need to, I think, go back and reclaim some of these things so that we aren't, we don't feel like we need to start from scratch. We don't feel like we actually have never had, those of us who are women, have never had a voice. It's just we need to be able to kind of reach back and say, what's part of the tradition that needs to be reclaimed? Part of this, I think we can go back to the last great Reformation that we had. And the church tends to work, religions in general, tend to work in 500-year cycles. Yeah, exactly. It takes a while for these things to change. It's really quite incredible when you go and you look at some of the research. Every 500 years, there's these major shifts where Christianity or other religions do exactly what we're looking at right now, where society kind of turns over on itself, and so does the soil of the major religions. Right? We start churning it up a little bit. 500 years ago, about give or take a couple years, was the Reformation, as an example, right? That was the last one that we had, one of these major shifts. And that was really alongside the shift of the Enlightenment, right? You know, this enlightened thinking, the time where academia and scientific thinking and empirical data became the currency of the day, right? And thank God for that. I don't know about you, I like modern medicine. I like being able to have electricity and things like that. But what it did do is it further stripped away the idea of the sacred feminine within religion, because they started to reclaim Aristotle and Plato and classic thinkers from the past who were very male-oriented. How male-oriented, you ask? I'm glad you did. Thank you for asking. That's great. They were so male-oriented that they actually, especially Aristotle, saw things as binaries, right? There was only black and white, good or bad, male or female. Guess which one was not good? The feminine body. So much so that the feminine body was considered even lower on the scale, not just because it was feminine and thus weaker, but because it was more porous or leaky, Aristotle would say. Leaky. There were more fluids that left a woman. Truly, like I know, this is classic antiquity, folks. This is what they were talking about, right? And that seeped its way so much into institutional religion that any sort of the divine feminine that would have been there, things like Mary Magdalene, you know, seeing the divine saints who are women, that was even more systematically stripped right out of the religious canon. So much so that if you wanted to in any way be a woman in a religious system, you had to become a nun or something even more, like Julian of Norwich, who was an anchorite. Does anybody know what an anchorite is? I'm seeing some head shake, yes. An anchorite is somebody who becomes a hermit, such to the extreme that they walled themselves into little rooms outside of a church. And Julian's anchor hole, as they were called, because she was an anchorite, her anchor hole had 2 holes, one that looked out onto the street and one that looked into the church where she could have the sacrament once a day. It's extreme, is it not? Right? Yeah. You might ask yourself, what would make a person do this? Because in this day and age, right, at the start of the Enlightenment and a little bit before, women only had a voice in the sacramental life of the church or the spiritual life of the church if they were willing to become nuns and do extreme practices to become mystics, right? So they would do things like become an anchorite. Some of them would also fast to the point of suppressing their menstruation because it was thought that a holy woman didn't have her period. And on top of that, these holy fasts would also often give them mystical visions, which would give them authority to talk within the church structure. Do you see how much like the feminine body actually gets wrapped up in these spiritualities, such that when we are about to turn to what are some of the practices that we can glean from this, we have to make sure that we see our spirituality as both for us and for the moment we're living in, right? So what I mean by that is if we're in the beginning of one of these 500-year shifts, it means the ground is very fertile for us to plant a spiritual seed into it. You might call it a womb space of time. And that particular type of womb space calls for people who are doing deep spiritual work, and again, not just for themselves, but because you know your spirituality is going to influence the next 500 years of spirituality. And it's quite clear we have a lot we need to reclaim and a lot we need to undo so that the next 500 years won't feel the same oppression within our spiritual practices. Now, I'm going to pause there for a moment. What are some things that are coming up for you in this? I love taking questions as we go, and we're about to make a shift past the history. So, yeah, please.
It seems like right from the get-go, the standard is set much higher
Yeah.
for women.
Yes. Yes.
They're forced to jump through hoops and have a mystical vision and so forth in order to just even join the conversation.
Uh-huh.
And it's
Exactly.
like, really? From the get-go?
From the jump, we have to be prepping for stigmata, which was
Right.
one of the thoughts of fasting, that extreme. Yeah, great point. You know, there are, you know that expression that women have to work twice as hard to be thought of as half as good, right? Exactly. That's I think what you're pointing to. And so one of the reasons our spiritual practices are so important is because it gives us the spiritual stamina to withstand not only the years of oppression that we're trying to overturn, but also it's a brave thing to plant seeds for trees we won't sit under, right? Which is essentially what we're saying is happening in moments like this, right? So the only way to do that and not get burnt out is to have a deep set of spiritual practices that you can pull from. Most of the most wonderful social justice crusaders I know are also deeply spiritual people. Think Martin Luther King Jr. as a great example. We often forget that he was a Baptist minister, and his faith was one of the number one things that helped him keep going. Because if you don't have those things in equal measure, there's no end to the work that we can try to do, and yet the society, as you rightly said, society and religion are not really actually built to support us in that. So we have to support ourselves and one another in it. Other thoughts? Please. We're going to grab the microphone. Yeah, thank you.
My goodness. That way, now I have to say something important.
Here online.
Yeah, for our friends online.
Okay, so I love what you said about the practices, the daily practices as enhancing our lives and our spirituality and everything about our days. But even more important, it seems to me, is what you said about relaying pipe for the future.
Yes.
And I love to bring that dimension in whenever I'm talking about spiritual practices. We're not just doing this for ourselves.
That's right. Well said.
So you say some more about that, because I
Great.
really feel like that's a mission.
It's a mission, and I think especially important for women, right? We're often called upon to help our families and our societies and to cultivate them, right? It's that word of mercy and compassion from God again, right? It's the growing thing that we tend to do, right? So beautifully said. I'd love to talk more about that when we turn to the Native American practices in a moment, so thank you. Were you about to say question, hand? Oh, we have one right here. Great, please.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
One thing I was thinking is that, we're all vibrational beings and we all have this energy, and it really has taken a lot of oppression to keep that down.
Yeah.
But the more that we are in tune with our God and all these spiritual practices, then the more people will feel our energy and be drawn
Beautiful.
to us.
Beautiful, exactly. It's just, again, this magnification, not just for ourselves, but for others. Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. We have another hand back here. We'll take one more, and then we'll keep going.
There also is a tradition that goes way back. I'm thinking of Lydia, who was in trade, and a tradition of women who, through business and trade, became spiritually connected. I'm thinking of Marjorie Kemp later on,
Yes.
13th, 14th century, who was a beer maker.
Yeah.
And, she had a turnaround and became a spiritual person. So interestingly, talking about connecting and being part of a support group, maybe women in business have, traditionally become part of a kind of support group.
I love that. Eventually, as we do this work, the line between our spiritual life and the rest of our life should intentionally be very blurred. It should actually become one and the same, right? So that everything we do, let's say on our meditation cushion, informs the conversations we have, or yes, the business that we do, or it supports it all. So I think that's a really good point. I had a New Testament professor used to say that in the New Testament, most women either had demons or diamonds. And what he meant by that was they were either being healed of something, or they were funding the mission of even Jesus. Like all of these mendicant preachers walking around had to have a purse from somewhere, right? And they were often the women in the group who were using their funding, or their husband's funding, or their brother's funding, and like actually using it to fund the ministry of even Jesus. So you make a great point. Wonderful. Okay, so here's where we can start to make a shift, and why I think knowing that history is so important. For those of us who have mostly spent our lives in that Western tradition, and I would hearken a guess that many of us have, we forget about the people who have thus been colonialized by much of that Western colonial system, and how those spiritualities were tried to be suppressed, but many times were not, that suppression was unsuccessful because of a resiliency of spirit. In particular, as was mentioned, thank you, I'm a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa on my mother's side, and what's beautiful about that tradition is I've been able to learn from the traditional healers there about what makes a resilient spirit, the spirituality of a resilient spirit. One of the things the traditional healer at our tribe loves to talk about, and he's so right, is that, the only way to have somebody take the spirit from you is if you let them. They can take everything else from you, but they can't actually take the spirit unless you let them, right? So the idea boils up, kind of bubbles up within us, that there can be something that sustains us even within the cultures of oppression that we are in. And it goes further, not just to ourselves, but to the way that we're doing this for other people. In Native American understanding, there's a concept called blood memory. Blood memory. This is a concept that it looks at our ancestors and says, it's not just your hair color or how tall you'll be that you inherit from your ancestors. Rather, you inherit so much from your ancestors from 7 generations behind you, and you are influencing 7 generations beyond you, with especially things like practices of spirituality. They talk about it almost as though it's like DNA, right? Like you pass on your spirituality to your ancestors, and they don't just mean that in a tangible blood way, even though it's called blood memory. They mean it in the way that you are with your people, your community, so that you can be an ancestor to somebody you're not even related to, and then you can have an ancestor who's not related to you. And how it works is, let's say you have an ancestor who was particularly amazing at being a grateful person, right? No matter what was going on, they knew how to stay in gratitude. That means that you have that within you as well, that your ancestor has given that to you. Now, as beautiful as that sounds, you might say, well, that sounds like a nice idea, but does it work? Is that true? Well, modern science is finally catching up to indigenous wisdom. Many of us have heard in the last few years about intergenerational trauma. I'm seeing some head shake. Intergenerational trauma and epigenetic studies take each human being and who they study, and they look at the DNA patterns and signatures from at least 3 generations. I think eventually they're going to catch up to Native Americans and do all 7. But what they have found is that if your ancestor, let's say your grandmother, had a truly traumatic event happen to her, it actually changes the way the DNA works in the body, down to a cellular level. The way hormones move in the body are changed, the way the organ functions change, the way people are able to make connections change, and it's like almost a 360 thing that happens to the body. There's a great book on trauma called The Body Keeps the Score, and that's because it actually does live on a cellular level. But beyond that, as terrible that is for your grandmother, because her DNA is changed, that will change the DNA of her daughter and then you. So the people who have trauma in their background actually have that passed on a cellular level. And those people tend to be more prone to PTSD, depression, suicide rates are higher. It's that much of a huge change can be passed down. However, what the Native Americans are telling us is that can actually happen, of course, with the other stuff too. The joy, the gratitude, the virtues, right? These things can be passed down. And actually, again, science is catching up, it actually works on the same way. Those who practice gratitude practices, even something as simple as keeping a gratitude journal, what they find is that their hormones are better regulated, that they make more of things like serotonin. They find that their heart rates are better, their lungs work better, they sleep better, they're less depressed. Have I convinced you yet? Any one of these would be fine, right? I'll take all of them, please. And that changes the DNA and the cellular level of how it works. So when we're saying that these spiritual practices matter, we mean it on a cellular level so that you are changing yourself, and then that gets passed on as well. Isn't that incredible? These are powerful, powerful things, and that we actually have to, I think, it's not just think about, but practice to the point that we are making a deep, deep difference. So one of the ways that Native Americans practice this in particular, bless you, in particular the way the feminine side of Native American practice is by seeing the whole life cycle as a cycle that mirrors both the moon as well as summer, winter, spring, and fall. That our bodies are actually so wed to creation itself that they follow the same cyclical pattern. In particular, they notice this with what they call the moon cycle, which is often seen as the menstrual cycle. But it's not just for those who have their period, it's also for those who have stopped having their period or who have never had their period. It's a thing that the body does because it's a part of creation, in other words. And the way that they follow this is by honoring the way the moon moves within the sky. They call the moon Grandmother Moon in my tribe, and when we watch Grandmother Moon, we realize that she actually has like 13 cycles throughout a year, right? The lunar cycle is 13. A typical woman will have about 13 menstrual cycles within a year as well. And within that particular month, you can see all the cycles cycle through. And again, they don't just think about this for menstruation, they think about this as the entire life can look this way as well, right? If you're young, you might be in the springtime of your life, right? A little bit older, midlife might be more like summer into fall. It might be the last stage, thinking of it as winter. Not in any negative way, but as seeing each one of them having its own beauty and strength as it goes. And that this lives within the feminine body. The male body has within it the solar structure, following the sun every day. So they live a 24-hour cycle. Have you ever noticed sometimes that men can go to sleep and like wake up? Have you seen this yourself in your own life, where you can kind of go to sleep some days and wake up and the rest of it's okay again? There's like a restart, right? yeah. There's like a restart. That's because in the Native American tradition, the Ayurvedic tradition, most like indigenous traditions, the 24-hour solar cycle is the male, and the dark but very brooding and also very life-giving 13-month cycle is the feminine cycle. Isn't that amazing? So then that means that in a year, a man lives a year. In a year, a woman lives 13 years. Because, do you see what I'm saying? I know. It's pretty great. This is why women mature faster. Do you see how that works? It's pretty great. And I think there's something to it, right? It's why so many Native American cultures, the grandmothers are considered the most honored elder, because they have lived so many more years than the man has lived, even if they're the same age. Because every year a woman has gone through, even if they're not menstruating anymore, a woman has gone through a lunar cycle of 13 years. Isn't that incredible? Yeah. So you can see the wisdom that might come from that, the resilience that might come from that, from starting to understand the way the seasons change within us and within the world, and how we might be able to actually help the world understand more of this. I'll give you an example from the indigenous Celtic side of things, and how Christianity can kind of work for or against these things. So in the 12 days of Christmas, there is a feast day called St. Stephen's Day. St. Stephen's Day used to be considered in the Celtic calendar the day when young men would be taken out into the woods to find a wren. Have you ever heard the Christmas hymn, the wren? It's not a hymn, it's a song. The wren is the king of all birds. On St. Stephen's Day, he got stuck in the burrs. Have you ever heard that one before? If you listen to the Chieftains Celtic Christmas album, it's on that one. So you'll like it. It's very good. The reason they celebrate that is because the wren was seen as a male fertility bird, right? And that Mother Earth, because it's December, is asleep and needs to also have life generated within her. So the young men would be taken out, it's a little graphic, I apologize, taken out to find the wren, to drain the wren of its blood into a hole in the earth to impregnate Mother Earth again so that spring would come back. Now you might say to yourself, that's weird, and that's, but what it shows is that young men had to be taught the relationship between blood and life. Women do not typically have these rituals across human history. Normally these are male histories, right? Like the first hunt for the male. Because women already naturally have a process as part of their maturation to understand the association of blood and life, right? It's in the period, it's also within when you give birth and blood and water come forth, which, by the way, in the Middle Ages, people saw that as the wound of Christ. When he was crucified on the cross, blood and water are poured forth when he's stabbed in the side. And so much so that you can go and find, you can just Google this, there are breviaries that have the side of Jesus opened like a vaginal birth canal, and new Christians are pulled out forth from it. I know that sounds strange, but this is the sort of like deep, earthy wisdom that we see within this. So when the church came to Ireland and they saw this happening, they said, oh, okay, well, we'll baptize this, and we'll make St. Stephen's Day, the first martyr of the church, associated with the spilling of the blood, because his blood was spilled. And instead of the charity that they would often give to people in their community they would also, that's when Boxing Day started, in other words, that they started taking collections for people in their community to make it through the long winter. Right, so you see how these things work and evolve? We shouldn't be afraid to start evolving some of these things, because Christians and other people have been doing this for years, for generations. So what are some of the rituals that we can benefit from, that we can learn in particular from Native American wisdom and from some of the spiritual ancestors of the past in the feminine tradition? Well, one thing is to ask ourselves the question, where are we in our life cycle? Do we feel, are we in a spring? Are we in a fall, a winter, summer? Where are we in this cycle? It's good to locate yourself, because with each different part of the cycle, be it the menstrual cycle or just the internal cycle or the life cycle, each one of them has a deep set of practices that can go alongside of them. For example, when a woman was on her moon cycle in the Native American tradition, still it's this way, she would take the first 3 days of her moon cycle and not cook anything, and would often actually have a place to just rest for most of those days. Sounds like a really good idea. Sounds like a great idea, right? And it wasn't just a matter of letting her rest. It's because a woman, when she's on her moon cycle, was seen to be the most spiritually aware and awake that somebody could possibly be. They weren't even allowed to be in sweat lodges with men, because it was going to be too much for the man to handle. Such was the spiritual energy. And because of that, they weren't going to touch food either. They weren't going to prepare the food, because it's almost like it would be too much for somebody to take all that in, right? It's the time where they were able to look into the face of Grandmother Moon and hear a word of message for their tribe. And what I find is really quite powerful about that is when you marry that with modern science, most people, when they think of being on their period or even past their period, they think of that time as very unstabilizing. Actually, that's the PMS section, but when you're on your period, the first 3 days, the hormones are so imbalanced that the two hemispheres of the brain are best in communication with themselves other than any other time in a woman's period. Isn't that incredible? In the entire rest of the month, your brain is most in sync with each other. So what they tell us then in spiritual practices, when you feel like you're in, let's say, a winter of your life, because a woman's menstruation cycle is seen as a winter when she starts her period, you're actually probably at your most clearest, your most wisest. It's probably the time to sit and take time out of your normal busy schedule, and even if it's for a few hours, and get real clarity about what the Spirit is asking for you in your life. So in this moment, in a spiritual winter, let's say, a winter of your life, it's good to sit down, meditate, and I highly recommend, I don't want to say make a vision board, but capture almost an icon of what it is that you're seeing in your prayer life. This is especially true if you've been attentive to the other part of your month, let's say, or creative cycle or whatever, such that you haven't burnt yourself out by the time you get here, right? This time of winter where you're doing deep visioning doesn't just happen when you sit down on your cushion that one time. It's because you've remembered that you're part of a large cycle. And it can happen in a day, it can happen in a month, it can happen in several years. That's why I said it's good for you to find in your own self where you think you are on this particular life cycle. From there, once your winter season is over and you're ready to start back into that springtime, right, that spring feel, what ends up happening is there's typically in the menstrual cycle, but also in this creative cycle, a surge of energy. And what that is in tune to, and what they watch the elders who are no longer menstruating, they still have a surge of energy. We tend to think of this as when we're at our most open and creative, right? You know those moments where you just kind of feel, my brain is open, I have a million ideas today, right? You're in the shower and you can't stop thinking about these things, right? A very good spiritual practice that they will tend to recommend during this time is a balance of good, strong exercise, but no sugar. They cut out sugar at this time frame because you want to harness the part of yourself that doesn't burn out in that stage, right? So when you're at your most creative, your most springtime-like stage within yourself, you actually have to find very grounding and stabilizing practices, including the foods you eat. I think somebody in the room is practicing Ayurvedic, right? Are you? Yeah. This would be the time where you're like doing your kappa foods, right? You know, like trying to do like good grains to stabilize you so that you don't feel too flighty, if it were, in a way. And sugar can almost make you go too fast, too far, and you'll burn yourself out for the rest of your creative cycle. Anybody ever have that happen to them where they're like, I just have so many ideas, I gotta get them all down, and then you get them all down, and then you're like, I'm done. I have no energy left to actually do these things. So there's a balance of moderation that goes into this. If you're going to have, one way to do this then is to have your creative endeavors, but then to have a more physical practice to go alongside of it. Most people will find this part of their creative cycle, menstrual cycle, whatever it is, your springtime, is your hardest time to meditate because your mind is racing so much, right? You tend to be going. So find a practice that will let your body kind of wear itself out. It's great to do more high activity exercise or higher activity yoga at this time. Even just taking a walk every day to make sure you're kind of burning the energy in the body, so that when you are meditating, you don't have too much else that's spinning you out, if that makes sense. Has anybody ever felt that in their own life, in their own meditation practices, where there's just some weeks where you're like, not this week? Have you had that happen? Yeah. This might be why. It might be because you haven't had somebody come up alongside you and say, hey, what you really need is good hard exercise and a weighted blanket. It's kind of like that in a moment like this. So the next stage from the springtime then, of course, is our summertime. This is the time, just like they would in their own Native American society, this is the planting time, right? This is where you would not only plant stuff in the spring, but now you might be waiting for some harvest. So a deep spiritual practice that can happen in the springtime is to learn how to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You know, I mentioned the gratitude practice a little bit ago. I am so convinced that gratitude belongs in a creative cycle and a life cycle that I make it a part of my life every single day, but it really bears fruit in this time frame because you're able to step back and say, these are the things that I'm seeing happening that I planted here and that I know is going to happen later on, and to just wait for a little bit for that gratitude to start taking root. How it works in the body is that the gratitude starts to shift, as I mentioned earlier, our hormonal systems, our bodily systems, such that if you plant gratitude in the summer season, you'll be able to harvest it later in the winter season, right? Because it just gets that deep within you. So in the summer season, the spiritual practices, these are the times that you can finish up projects. You still have a little bit of energy from that springtime. If you have things on your to-do list or your conversation list that you need to do, this is the time to have those hard conversations. And it's often when that transition between the spring into the summer, that's the interesting thing that happens within the woman's body is that they become more energetic, but also even their eyes get bigger and brighter. It's the time they say to ask for a raise because you're more magnanimous and able to connect with other human beings because those human connection hormones are higher and turned up more in the body. Isn't that fascinating? So all those things can be true within your spiritual practice as well. This is a great time to join with others in spirituality. Maybe go to a church, but also maybe go to a yoga class, maybe go to a friend's house. It's also, though, a time to get really clear about your boundaries. Boundaries as a spiritual practice come in hard here because you're just about to go back to the winter phase and you want to have some energy stored up for that. Women typically are not very good at keeping our boundaries because society has asked us to do everything for everybody all the time. So it's a good time to remember that no is a complete sentence. Summer is the time to speak that sentence a lot. And that brings you back to the deep winter. And once you've had a very enriching spring, summer, and fall. Winter won't feel so taxing. It'll actually feel, like I said, that rich, deep spiritual space where new life can be seen because you're in that visioning mindset. Their wisdom here is quite incredible, isn't it? To see how they follow the internal cycles with the external cycles of the year, because we're a part of creation. And as I said, it's not just about whether or not you're menstruating, it's about whether or not you can see that in creation and within yourself as part of the creative and life process. So it's a lifelong pattern that women engage in up until the time they pass away, actually. So it's truly not just about one stage in life, but about all of it. So we have just a few more minutes for questions, so I'm going to pause there. Thoughts, questions about this? What are you hearing or seeing? Thank you, Tracy. Go for it.
You talked a little bit about postmenopausal women,
Yes.
but I see a few gray hairs here. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the special considerations
Yeah.
for the postmenopausal women
Absolutely.
and their spiritual health.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
So the postmenopausal woman takes this pattern and they keep going with it. It's not about whether or not you still bleed. It's about whether or not you see yourself as part of creation, right? So even if they don't have the bleeding of the period to tell you when those cycles are happening, the body still goes through these natural cycles of energetic time frames, right? Well beyond somebody's hitting any sort of age. So everything that I've said can be applied to that. But there's another element so I'm so glad you asked this question. The final element to it is when you are able to hit that elder stage of postmenopausal living. It is seen as the time where you are entering into your deepest wisdom tradition time, right? You are now a lineage bearer for all of these traditions, and you're teaching other people and the entire tribe often how to live like this. That particular idea is quite different in Western worlds, where we do not honor our ancestors. We do not, by and large, honor our elders. And we're living in an age where we are starved in the Western society for elders and their wisdom, because we have not been listening to them, and so nobody has trained people in how to be an elder, especially in a time frame when our technology is outpacing us at a faster and faster clip. Who even knows how to be an elder in this time frame, right? These practices help you do that, because you're going to help people weather these cycles well beyond any one person's ability to understand the cycles, and to make it much more of a wider view for all of the creative process. So thank you, absolutely. It's for everybody, for all life. We're gonna, yeah? Oh. Yes, please.
I was just going to say, in the tradition of the Native Americans, I have always loved the statue pieces of the elder in the center, usually a woman, and the children and the young people listening to the oral
Yes.
description of history and who they are.
Yeah.
It seems to me that that is just such a, if you live in that community, you physically see it
Yeah.
all the time, even if you're not thinking about it, just because it has become such an important art form.
That's right. And because there's an understanding of living tied to these natural cycles, it's evident. You know, none of this would have had to have been explained. This was just evident. Was there another hand? Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you.
Hillary, I'm loving all of this Native
I'm glad.
American, I'm just loving all of it. So my question to you is I'm sitting here and thinking about the 7 generations before me, and now the 7 generations that will go ahead of me that I am now responsible for.
Yep.
And I'm thinking of my life and my 2 daughters that I've already birthed, and the lack of wisdom I had when I birthed them. How is that being transferred?
Great question.
As I age,
Yep.
both in modeling, but also genetically?
Yeah.
Is there some answer in
Great question. Absolutely. And this is why in Native American culture, the ancestors are not just the genetic ancestors of our past, right? They're also the people within our community that help foster deep spiritual growth over a lifetime. So to your great question, there's no ending to this evolution process. That includes not only what you are able to learn and teach others in your lifetime or pass them down with genetics, it's also in the corporate understanding of how the spirit works beyond here and now, right? If we heal ourselves, and the Native Americans are very clear about this, if we heal ourselves in the here and now, we also heal 7 generations behind us. Like we send the healing back to our spiritual ancestors and then send it 7 generations beyond us. So if you want to stop a pattern of trauma or pain within your society and family, stop it with yourself. And it heals and radiates in ways that you can't even imagine. In the Christian tradition, we say this as well when we talk about the communion of saints, right? We believe that there's this active body of spiritual followers together that make up this kind of cosmic web. They call it the great cloud of witnesses. And because of that, there is healing that can be passed both forward and back. So just keep being you, and it'll, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think we have one more minute, so one more question. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to build on that idea because it's very contrary to how most women operate.
Right?
Which is we're very busy fixing others.
Yes, yes,
And
yes, yes.
it's a very powerful idea that we can put significantly more energy into our own growth and our own spirituality and have perhaps even more impact.
Isn't that powerful? Almost certainly more impact. Yeah.
Right? And it's a real mind shift because we tend to be so outer directed and not very much inward directed.
So well said. I mean, how many of us have said that have thought to ourselves, oh, I'd love to do some self-care practice or spirituality, but it feels so selfish. Or, I don't have time for it. Or if we actually want to change the world, and it's probably the least selfish thing we can do, is to find time for this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, friends.
Hillary, that was amazing, totally amazing. Hillary's going to come back after we take a break. I actually just want to say that I know this is a conversation for another day, but I would love to know the implications of sacred feminine wisdom, especially the indigenous part, for men, because we have feminine sides to our personalities, and it must be relevant to us as well. But because there's a lot of women in the room who unfortunately have to deal with us. But we have to take a bio break, and we have snacks. Lisa Storch from Catch a Healthy Habit has provided some things for us to eat. They're all vegan, in case anybody has any dietary restrictions, so I think we should be fine. And Bigelow Tea has provided a tea bar over here, so enjoy. We're going to take 15 minutes. There's a bathroom at the end of the hall through the door, and then there's another bathroom just right there around the corner. So 15 minutes and we'll come back together. Okay, everyone. I don't want to break up the fun, but we need to regroup. I think maybe, can everybody hear me? Hello?
I'll do it.
Hello, hello, hello.
Can you whistle?
I can't.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Let's go. Let's go. All right, everybody, let's go.
Yeah. Grab a snack and sit down, please. We've got lots of food, so don't hold back. Yeah, I know. Can you grab a seat, everyone? We'd like to get started. We want to make sure that we get you out of here roughly on time. I think we might go 5-10 minutes longer. Thank you, everyone. I just want to thank Lisa Storch from Catch a Healthy Habit, who provided the goodies that we just enjoyed. wonderful, wonderful food. Yeah. Believe it or not, there's a lot more in the kitchen, so take some home with you. But thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Has everybody got what they need? We're going to resume. And Hillary, you're going to help us with an exercise? So we have a little bit of a contemplative piece here. So I'll give you back to Hillary.
Can you remind me when you'd like this piece to be over? 10 minutes. Great, because there was a couple of questions I had too. Is that all right to do that as well? Okay, great. 10's fine. Friends, we're going to engage in a Kundalini breathing practice in a moment. And I'm trained as a yoga teacher in both Ashtanga and Kundalini. And what I find is that they're a really good pairing. So if you're into yoga, check out putting those two together. The reason we're going to try that in a moment is it works really well in any part of the seasons of life. But I find it particularly works well in the first two, in the spring and summer of the creative cycle. So let's say, you're getting a good idea and you want to put something out in the world, or you're feeling inspired. How do you make sure that you don't burn yourself out on the energy of it, right? So we're going to practice that in a minute. It's called the ego eradicator. It's pretty good. And it is humbling. It is humbling. But I had a couple of really great questions about some of the material we went over that I thought would be helpful for the whole group to talk about. One was kind of more of what does Western Christianity have to learn from all of this kind of a question? And that one's right up my alley, because part of what I love doing is teaching liturgical and ascetical theology for seminarians. I promise it won't be boring. It won't be like seminarian stuff. But what I think is so important is when you go back to the tradition, some of what I was mentioning about Mary Magdalene, for example. We see that when Jesus was given both Peter and Mary a piece of Jesus' teaching, we have a perfect balance of the feminine and masculine, don't we? Right? And that when we see all of the things that they are holding in their lineage together, we know that we have the strong foundation of Peter the rock and the towering vision of Mary the tower. Those two things going together, at the very least on a practical, practicing level, means that we have to, and we're watching this in the data, it's very fascinating. We have to be able to lift up both the more masculine rock practices and the feminine tower practices. And what I mean by that is, those things that are aligned with Peter tend to be Eucharist and baptism, right, in the Christian tradition. And also the Pope. So those things tend to have like the Petrine tradition. Now, you might have noticed that Eucharist and baptism are the things that get talked about a lot in churches, right? Like those are kind of like the two main sacraments are what they tend to be seen as. I'm not knocking Eucharist or baptism, so nobody go and tell my bishop that I'm doing that, all right? That's noted. But what it does then is all of the other traditions were associated with Mary Magdalene, in particular the pastoral, what are known as the pastoral offices. You heard me say these include anointing and laying on of hands, things we might consider energy work today, right? The idea of being able to heal people with one another. It also includes things like private confession, which gets a bad rap because of how it's been used in the Petrine tradition. And all the way down to something like exorcism, which also gets a bad rap because of certain movies. Long story short, even in the Episcopal tradition, we have exorcism. But it is very much kept like hidden and nobody talks about it, for some good reasons, but also because it is very much associated with the feminine side of Christianity. The story of Mary Magdalene, for example, when she first comes onto the scene in the Gospels, she's described as Mary Magdalene, the one in whom Jesus exorcised 7 demons from. And that's not because she was bad. The difference of how we look at these things is we tend to see possession as somebody being bad, and so they invited demons in. A better way to look at it is oppression. Oppression. that people get caught in systems that tend to suppress them to the point of being systematically traumatized. So let's look at Mary's life, for example. Mary would have been from a small fishing community where the Roman Empire had come and really put their thumb on it. And so all of her relatives would have had to have been in service to the empire, the very people who came in and oppressed them to begin with. On top of that, she was a woman, so there's already that. And then she may have had some sort of need for spiritual healing, which we all do at some time in our life because of a deep grief or because of a deep trauma or because of a pain that we're going through, an addiction, whatever it might be. And so when she was exercised by Jesus, what the scholarly tradition says is that she was actually taught how to also do that ritual. And why that's important is because the number one thing that Jesus is seen doing in the Gospels is exorcism. He does exorcisms and spiritual healings more than anything else. So he has, in Mary Magdalene, this is why she's the lineage bearer, given the spiritual practices such that it's his most important spiritual practices. Right? Now, I'm not getting into the weeds about like how weird exorcism can get or anything like that. I'm simply saying that some of the Christian tradition that is still retained within it has been subjugated, and it now probably needs to have a more prominent role. We get calls all the time at churches from people who are outside the faith looking for the pastoral offices, weddings, funerals, but a lot of exorcisms, actually. We get calls for them. In fact, in the last 5 years, the Vatican, who's the only one who keeps stats on this, has seen, are you ready for this? A 700% increase in the request for exorcisms. Now, through my research, what I found is that's actually not uncommon in these moments of 500-year shifts, because everything in society is turning over on itself, and the normal stuff that used to make sense of everything stops making sense. So exorcisms and things people start looking for spiritual answers to what are actually spiritual questions, right? All that is to say, Christianity actually needs to start reclaiming parts of its own lineage and tradition that are more feminine if it's actually going to meet the requests and desires for spirituality in this time frame. And I'm not advocating for everybody doing exorcisms all over the place. I also want that known in case my bishop's watching for that either. But you take my point, right? Like people are looking for pastoral spiritual healing. And instead what they tend to get is, okay, that's great, but here's a pledge card, right? You know what I mean? Like it's a very different sort of thing that Christianity is being asked of it. So that was one question I received. Don't worry, I'm watching the time, I promise. Another big question that came up in a different way and with many different viewpoints was, what do we do when we hear something like this and we realize there's something within ourself that deeply needs to be healed, and now we know it's not just for ourselves but for other people in our community or in our family, right? Like what if we've done something that has caused a trauma? Or what if we're carrying a trauma and we've accidentally carried it on without knowing it, right? There's really hopeful and good news in what we've just walked through, because it means there's never a time that sending healing both forward and back can't happen, right? For one, if you're sending it back, that means you're sending it to your ancestors, many of whom are no longer walking with us on this plane of existence. But that is not a barrier to how healing can happen. And the way that you can heal forward, it's not limited to mistakes we've made or traumas we've passed down. There's never a moment that you can't start that healing process. And if you start it within yourself, you'll be able then to pass it on in a much more authentic way, right? Instead of saying to somebody, we need to stop doing this because of that. But when you start living the change, they will want to be able to travel along this journey with you. That's not only true of pains and traumas, it's really true of grief and things we need to forgive, both within ourselves and others too, right? One of the most important spiritual practices you can take on for yourself is a practice of forgiveness. It will change your life. And one of the things I'm convinced of is it's not just a one and done type of thing, right? Forgiveness literally is a process, and it can take a long time. Anybody who tells you just forgive and forget, they're kidding themselves. Not even Jesus said that. He said, how many times did you forgive? 70 times 70, right? Like a process, in other words. He knew it was going to take a minute. So let that be the seed of hope that's planted in you, that you can indeed continue forgiveness and healing, etc. Last thing, and then we're going to do our ego eradicator. The other thing that there was a question about was the power of gratitude as a spiritual practice. We live in an era of what's known as toxic positivity and prosperity gospel. Here's what I mean by those things. In Christianity in America, especially in the last, we're going to call it 100 years, there's been a rise of saying that if something's wrong in your life, it's because you don't have a good attitude about it or because you're not praying the right way, right? And it's like if you pray the right prayer and you pray it the right way, God is going to reward you, as though God's some sort of like slot machine, right? If you put enough prayers in, you're going to get what you want back. Turn on any Christian news network and you're going to hear this, right? You know, like the reason God is doing this to our country is because God's punishing us for something, right? These sorts of problems are so ingrained with what it is to be in modern American Christianity that we sometimes get the feeling like if things are going wrongly, it's because I'm a terrible person and because God must be mad at me and because I'm not praying a certain way. There's nothing in the biblical tradition that actually supports this theology. It's a heresy. I'm happy to have my bishop hear me say that. that absolutely is heresy. And what the problem with it is that it supports the mindset that you have to do this alone, right? Like if you don't have the right prayer, God's not going to like you, so you might as well not try, right? Gratitude does the exact opposite thing. Gratitude says that you are able to be with God every single day in whatever way the Spirit is showing up for you and saying, okay, today I am going to see this particular piece as being a part of the whole story of where gratitude lies in my life. It's not saying I'm grateful for everything, because we're not asked to be grateful for everything, but we are encouraged to see spiritual growth as being grateful in everything. Right? Do you see the difference? To be grateful in everything, even when we can't be grateful for everything. And that means that we have a heart that is tuned not just for happiness, but for joy. Two very different things. Happiness can be very fleeting and be circumstantial. What makes you happy one minute may not make you happy the next. But joy is a practice that you have spent time with God such that God and the Spirit has done enough work on you that even in all things, you can somehow find an alleluia even in the mix of grief. It's why in the funeral services we say, even at the grave, we make our song, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. That's what that means. So those were some of the comments and questions that came up, and ready to do some ego eradicating? Sound good? Okay, great. So if you'll take a posture that kind of supports your spine, I like to have both my feet on the ground if that feels comfortable for you. And if it feels comfortable for you, you might go ahead and close your eyes after I'm done with the demonstration. But you're invited to leave them open as well if that doesn't feel safe. One of the things we're going to ask you to do is to elevate your arms over your head, and if that doesn't feel good to you at this kind of angle, then you can just also kind of hold them in tight. You don't have to do it yet. The explanation, trust me. Trust me, you're not going to want to do this any longer than what I'm going to ask you to do, not 1 second longer. Now, in the classic Kundalini method of breath work, they ask you to do a lot of hand mudras, and the one for this is to pull all of your fingers in to make a fist, and your thumbs are out. The thumb is thought to be the center of the ego area in a hand mudra. And what we're trying to do is not say that somehow ego is bad with this. What we're trying to do is eliminate the ego's influence for us for when it's in fear, when it's in scarcity mindset, when the ego says, who do you think you are to even try a spiritual practice? Or when the ego says, well, of course you're the most spiritual person there's ever been, right? To let the ego kind of step out for a minute so that the rest of what we're working on gets to come back into play, right? What we're going to add to it is what's known as breath of fire. The idea is to kind of stoke a belly fire within yourself and to let the energizing breath circulate through the whole system. It's a very quick inhale, and the exhale kind of takes care of itself. It's like this. I'll step over here. You have to use your belly to do this. Can you feel your belly working like a bellows? It's like that. Okay, don't start yet, but I'm glad you practiced. This is good. And here's why I say don't start yet. We're going to put all that together with your arms extended, and the classic time for this is at least 3 minutes. Oh, you can see why it's humbling, right? You can see why it's humbling and why I said don't start yet. We won't do the full 3 minutes, don't worry. In fact, you're supposed to build up to 11 minutes, but I've not built. I'm not done. So I know it's a lot, isn't it? It's too much. So we're going to do it for a minute, because a minute's enough time to really start to feel this. I promise you, your arms won't fall off. They might feel like they will. But what you might start to notice is what's going through your head. Do you get angry? Do you get sad? Does grief come up? Do you hate me? Whatever it is, right? It could be all sorts of things. And the reason we do this is so that we can make friends with both the positive and the negative emotions, right? Both the stuff about ourselves we love and maybe the shadow sides, so that nothing is alienated in our own self, right? There's no orphan part of ourself that isn't invited to be a part of our life. Everything is welcome so that we can learn to grow and love with it, right? So that's why we're doing this. Okay. Straight posture, maybe close your eyes. If you think you might sweat or make a grimace, go ahead, no one's watching. You're gonna extend your arms either this way or all the way out at a 60-degree angle. Curve those fingers in and begin the breath of fire. A little bit longer. Inhale, lengthen the arms to their full extension. Hold that breath. Exhale. Release those hands back to your lap and pause for a moment. What's swirling around inside of you? What can you be grateful for? What is maybe released a little? What might it be like to use this practice to begin a time of meditation? Take one more inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Bring your hands together and rub them to add a little heat. And you'll place those over your eyes, maybe opening up your eyes underneath the palms of your hands to let the light slowly come back in and gently lower your palms. All right. Thank you, friends. I highly recommend using that as the start of your creative cycle as well as any meditation cycle you might enter into. It really helps center down. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to make a shift to our next speaker, who is Lisa Pirelli. Some of you may know Lisa. She is a culinary expert and a wellness coach. Her great gift is her deep understanding of the power of food to heal. She's also been the executive director of the Westport Chamber of Commerce, and she's been the executive chef for Nourish Bridgeport, which is a nonprofit food ministry in our neighboring town. Lisa's going to spend a few minutes with us, helping us deepen our understanding of the importance that the gut plays in our overall health and the food decisions that we make, as their impact can really transform the trajectory of health issues that we may be experiencing. So please welcome Lisa Pirelli.
Thanks, Mark. I don't know about all of you, but I feel like I can both run a marathon and take a long winter's nap after Hillary. It's funny because having to follow Hillary is a little stressful. I've never met her before, but she is so on target with so much that I believe and information that I didn't have that aligns with what I teach. And I might even start to cry because it was really beautiful. So I am so in gratitude. And it's so funny because a big part of what I teach with food, healing our bodies, begins with gratitude. So I have some questions to ask, and you can show hands or you can just nod your head. But one question I have, which I think is an interesting question, is how do you make a dark room light? And this is a question that a colleague of mine often asks a physician, and it gave me pause for a moment. And I won't ask you to answer, but I'll give you some of my answers. By lifting the blinds, by lighting a candle, by turning on the lights. And when we displace the darkness, we actually make room for light. And that is really the place of wellness, right? It's not necessarily removing things, but it's about adding positive, and naturally you expel the toxins in your body and in your life. And it's so funny because I talk about forgiveness and how forgiveness displaces anger and makes room for love. And I think one of the things that we don't do well as women is love our bodies. And I attended a workshop a couple years ago. And one of the things that we had to do was thank our bodies. And one of the traumas that I went through was 2 emergency C-sections to deliver my beautiful daughters. And in that trauma, for anyone who's had a C-section, your body doesn't really go back to the pre-body or pre-birthing stage. No matter how much weight you lose or gain, you always have this little tummy. And now that I'm postmenopausal, it's a little bit bigger. But one of my issues was this little roll of my stomach. And, you know, before I had children, I never did a sit-up. I was graced and blessed with a flat six-pack. I just didn't do anything for it. But now, no matter what I do, I can't get there. So I'm sitting in this room, and I had to make peace with the things that I didn't love about my body, ironically, because I teach how to heal yourselves, and now I'm being taught. And what I realized was that in the trauma of having an emergency C-section, not once but twice, that my body birthed my 2 amazing daughters. And if I could do it all over again, I would do it exactly the same way. And I am so proud that my body was strong enough to be able to birth these daughters of mine. I am so proud that my body allowed me to carry them when I was in pain. I am so proud of my body that has allowed me to move forward and play with them and attend to their needs and serve them. So in telling you that story, I want you to look at your body in your head and think about the journey that you have taken
and recognize that you have a beautiful body, right? We have a body that has survived so much and thrives by the way we look at it, right? So grace is a big part of that. And well-being is adding healthy habits. And when Mark and I met, I don't know that we initially thought that I would be standing here speaking to you. And he kept asking me, so what can you talk about? And I'm like, I could talk for hours. I could listen to Hillary for hours, but I know I could talk for hours. But healthy foods are, again, the light that we enter into the dark room, right? Healthy foods empower us and give us energy. And I don't even like to use the word food so much, although I love this definition of food. And I don't know if you think about it, but food is what we grow, okay? Food is not in a box. I eat boxed foods, just so we know. Like, I am balanced, okay? But food is what we grow. Fuel is what we put into our bodies. I have the privilege of occasionally teaching students in a middle school, and during their gym class, they'll have a quarter or a module of health and nutrition. And I'll go in there, and one day, I don't know, God was speaking through me, and I always pray, please speak. I don't even know what I'm saying half the time. And I came up with this analogy that I have used with all of my clients. And it hits home for adults as well as children. You know, but when I would talk to the kids the first time, I said, you know, in about a year or two, you're going to get your license, and you're going to get a car, or you're going to drive a car, and you'll have the privilege of paying for gas, right? And at the gasoline station, there are 3 grades of gas, right? There's the regular, there's the extra regular, and there's the premium. I'm sorry, I'm missing that one, but the premium gas, right? The high test, there's regular, premium, and high test. I said it's the same with food, right? You can eat that candy bar before you go into your test and not eat breakfast. You're going to get a burst of energy. You're going to get, you know, a sugar high. Your engine's going to go, just like your car is going to go. But at what expense, right? What expense is your engine going to go? How soon thereafter will you need to do maintenance work? How clean is your engine? What is your gas mileage, right? Same is true with food, right? Your fuel that you choose to put into your bodies needs to serve the purpose in which you're trying to achieve, right? And in doing so, you get different results, right? So you can grab that candy bar and you're going to get that burst of energy. You can step it up and maybe have a sandwich, right? And have some good healthy fats on there. And maybe it's roast beef, and I eat meat, so I'm not a vegetarian. But you know, and maybe you have on the side, you have a bag of potato chips, right? And maybe if we're lucky, you chose an apple or a pear. And then you could also go to the next level and have some healthy, prepared protein. You know, I like steak, I like chicken, I like seafood, okay? I like it because it's God's food. There's no bad food in my teachings, just bad attitudes towards food, right? So you can choose fuel that serves you better, and the car that's getting the high test and the premium gasoline is going to probably have a cleaner engine for longer periods of time, probably will not need the maintenance as often as the car that's getting fueled regularly. But what I tell the kids is, right, they're all 13 and 14 years old, and I think most of us are a little older than that today. And I say, you know, the seeds that you are planting today will impact you in 20, 30, 50 years. And I know that's a hard concept because I can remember being in high school and thinking the year 2000, how old am I going to be? Oh my God, I'm going to be 30, whatever I was. You know, that's really old. But it's so fascinating because so many of these kids are involved in sports or in performance activities, whether it's theater or dance, and they're starting to understand that their choices matter. So they matter to us as well. So when I was a young mom with young babies, I remember reading an article about moms, how it was important for us to take care of ourselves in order to take care of our families, right? And I thought, oh, that's great. That's good. That gives me permission to exercise in the morning, because oftentimes I would let that go because, oh my gosh, I got to get the kids here. I got to do this. It was a crazy life. We all have lived them, whether you have children or not. But I want to turn that around a little bit, especially after Hillary speaking. You know, we need to have a healthy body for us, right? Like, my number one goal for me is to live a longevity lifestyle so that I can enjoy my life, okay? What is my life? What brings me joy? Well, my number one joy is my family, okay? I don't want to be a burden to them. I want to be playing pickleball with them every day. I want to be sailing with them. I want to be skiing. I want to be, going on picnics and traveling. I want to travel to see them. I want to be able to drive to Florida if I need to, if I can't get a flight. I mean, I want to be able to do those things. I want to do the things that bring me joy. So it's not necessarily, when I read that article, it was about my responsibilities to my children, but our responsibility to us, to ourselves, is even greater, because now that I've just learned that I have the power to impact after birthing my children, thank God, because I'm telling you, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my, I was not the person that I am today, and I hope I'm light years ahead better in 20 years from now when I birth my kids. But it's essential. It's essential for us to take time, to make the time, and to value our bodies as the temples that they are, okay? I have goosebumps right now. I am just so high by the grace that has been spoken earlier. And I'm in such gratitude because it so aligns with everything that I've been talking about and that I live. So another question I have for all of you that I do want to see a show of hands is, how many of you woke up feeling rested this morning? Okay, a decent number. That's great. How many people felt energetic when they walked in the room? How many people needed that second cup of coffee to enter this room so that they felt energetic and felt well rested? Okay, there's a little bit more information. Okay, well, what I suggest to you is that to have better sleep, to have more clarity, to have more energy, to better absorb the nutrition that we're fueling our bodies with, we really need to be focused on what so many researchers are calling our second brain, which is our actual gut health, right? So it's our gut health along with our brain, and quite frankly, I think down the road we're going to find that the gut is really the number one brain, and the one up here is just taking orders from our tummies. And I'll tell you why. Because our gut health is responsible for our physical, our emotional, and our mental well-being, over 90%, right? So our choices of how we fuel will depend on how we feel. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So why is it that when we go to Western medicine doctors, and forgive me if anyone is a doctor in this room, because I go to Western medical doctors, why is it that we're constantly putting Band-Aids on? I don't think that I have ever come across one physician that practices Western medicine who's asked me, what are you eating? What are you eating to fuel your body? Tell me about your symptoms, and let's talk about how you got here, okay? And let's figure out the solutions so that we can then help you feel better, right? So that's a lot of what Hillary talks about. And I totally believe in the marriage of both Western and Eastern medicine, about Native American cultures. I think about, if we could only get a medical school that taught nutrition on a regular basis, if we could get culinary schools, by the way. There is one nutrition class that is taught in culinary schools, and it's a classroom class. I can't believe that. I'm in the process of being hired to a culinary school, and I'm not announcing it yet because it's not been formalized, so I'm just like, yay, I hope it happens. But anyway, and talking to the director of culinary, I said, my background is healing people with foods. He goes, that sounds great. We don't have anybody who does that here. And he goes, but you've got to teach cooking. And I said, yes, cooking food that heals. That's what I teach. That's what I do. He's like, oh, that would be great. That would be a great addition to our offerings. I'm like, awesome. How empowering is that to be talking to someone who thinks that I have a good idea? I love that. So, but to go back, how do we get to good gut health? Let me go back to how I kind of landed, not necessarily at the podium, but in what I'm doing now. A little history of me, brief, is that when I was 26, my mother was diagnosed at 47 with her first of many cancers, and it was a very aggressive form of breast cancer. At 26, she was diagnosed a month after my grandmother. My grandmother's sister already had breast cancer and had passed. My grandmother's sister, my Aunt Fran, her 2 daughters had breast cancer. And the one that had 2 daughters, both of those daughters had breast cancer. So I'm the last one. I'm like, oh my God, and I'm 26. I went right into therapy. I didn't know what to do with myself. That was my mother's insistence, God bless. And I made a decision, unbeknownst to myself, that I was going to focus on a longevity lifestyle. That wasn't a word that I had. It's only recently surfaced for me. But I made a decision at 26 to be more focused on health, nutrition, and exercise. So, boom, great. Come back, 36, or 38 rather, I was diagnosed with lupus 2 years after my youngest daughter was born. And I thought, wow. I was told that I had to make a choice to have more children. I couldn't be on all the medications they want to put me on. And even if I didn't take the meds, we didn't know what the health and well-being of the child would be or for me. And so I had to make that decision, or my husband and I had to. It was easier for him, but it wasn't for me because I envisioned this big family. And then I realized that I was blessed with 2 healthy children. So I made the pivot and I said, okay, let's bring them on. And because it was a scary time and nobody was talking about autoimmune diseases 22 years ago, the way they're talking about them now, or the way we are as a community, I jumped into all the medications. I didn't have any other choices, or so I was told. Now remember, I was longevity lifestyle, 26, but I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and I didn't have the training. So I'm on all the meds, and my weight skyrockets. I gained 35 pounds, and if anyone hasn't noticed, I'm 5'1". So 35 pounds is a lot of weight for me to carry. And aside from the vanity perspective, which I think I can admit to, it was more the physical interference that I couldn't just sit on the floor and play with my kids, okay? I had such, what's the word I'm looking for? I had such pain in my joints, inflammation, okay? I could not function, so much so that my mother paid for a babysitter to come every day, Monday through Friday, for 2.5 hours so I could take a nap in the afternoon while my girls were playing, right? So it was a really difficult struggle. And after about 5 or 6 years of all of these medications, maybe a little bit longer, I was saying, this isn't really helping. So I worked with my physicians and weaned me off all of them. Okay, so I am a lupus patient for 22 years, and I take no medication for it, okay? And my decision at that time was to focus on nutrition and exercise, to manage my flare-ups and to manage my pain. Okay, at 42, I had my first of 2 hip replacements. Each one is replaced, not the same one. Again, a little bit of a physical setback, not what I planned. But I will say that I embrace both of them, and I am so grateful because of the medical world that allows me to walk today. Because if I didn't have these choices, I'd be in a wheelchair and I would have a morphine drip because the pain was horrific, okay? And many of you, if you've had this experience, would probably be in the same boat, right? So grateful for the medical technology. And I have a friend here today who just had one less than 8 months ago or so, and I remember she wanted to talk to me about it, and I'm like, oh, sure, and I needed to talk to her, and on my way over to talking to Kim, I said, what am I going to tell her? And then I remembered Kim is a fitness instructor, okay? She has a wellness practice. I came to her, I said, here's the good news. You are already so fit, you're going to heal quickly. Your body is already ready for this surgery, and it was, and she's healed beautifully, all right? So again, the power of nutrition and healing is, it doesn't get any better than that, right? So and then at 54, I did a reset. So already I've decided that nutrition is my method and my medicine. I have gone off to culinary school, and I have been teaching and been certified. I have collected a clientele that has illness, that has seen major recovery or extended life periods because of a change of diet. That I have evidence of this. It's amazing, but I have it with my own self. So at 54, I did a reset, and I did an elimination diet. I eliminated sugar, which we all should be eliminating almost on a daily basis, not forever, because there are birthdays and so forth, right? And Christmas cookies. Let's be honest, right? But overall, I eliminated sugar, I eliminated dairy, I eliminated soy, I eliminated gluten, and I eliminated alcohol just for 30 days. And remember, I have lupus, and I try to manage my pain through exercise and nutrition. But what I didn't realize is my nutrition wasn't fine-tuned. And around day 16 or 17, I was jumping out of bed like Tigger. I mean, before that, I was Tim Conway shuffling across the stage every morning, okay? And this time, I'm jumping, and I literally have been jumping ever since. Okay, well, not jumping, but you know what I'm saying. But anyway, my point is in pivoting and removing foods and then reintroducing them for the educational purposes to understand how my body works, okay, how my body feels. Every body is different. Women's bodies are different. I still am amazed by the lack of research on medications and dosages that they've always used men. I mean, but as Hillary said, and I have been a huge proponent, we need men at the table. I wish there were more men here today, right? Because we only will move forward with men as our partners. They're not the villains, you know. We need them as partners. So anyway, so I do this whole reset, and I am a believer. I am a believer for myself. I am a believer of my clients. They see huge changes in their ability to move, and that's what it's really about. You know, we want the good sleep because we want the energy because we want to be able to move. We don't want to be relegated to the couch and watch TV. At least I don't. I don't even, I mean, I own a TV. I think I turn it on 3 times a year. You know, I want that freedom of choice. And the freedom of choice comes from decisions that you make on a daily basis, right? One of the greatest gifts that I was given as a new mom with our pediatrician, who I absolutely loved and adored. He gave me so many pearls of wisdom, but one of them was about feeding. And right about when Madeline had teeth, she was around 1 year old, no longer doing formula because I had just stopped breastfeeding, and Dr. Weinberger, who is just amazing, said, listen, he said, don't worry about getting 4 or 3 square meals into Madeline each day. Worry about it on a cumulative factor, right? Maybe today was the day where she only wanted to eat fruits and vegetables. And tomorrow she's all about chicken, you know, but by the end of the week, did she get all of what she needed? And that is what we have to be looking at. So when you decide to have that birthday cake with a couple of glasses of Prosecco, right? Enjoy it. Enjoy it, because I do. I enjoy it, okay? I already know how I'm going to feel in the morning, and maybe my sleep will be impacted, but I'm enjoying it. And then after that, I don't really need to have it anytime soon because I want to feel my best. I am a person who's known that when I go to a party, a cocktail party, or go out to a bar or go out to dinner, I will usually only have 1 glass of whatever I'm drinking. It's because I want to wake up in the morning bouncing out like Tigger. I mean, Tigger is my hero, right? So that's how I want to operate. I don't want to give up any days. You know, there are days where sometimes I can't get out of bed, but it's not because of my physical self, it's because of my emotional healing, right? So I have evidence that food matters, right? And I also believe in balance. So, you know, there are so many diets out there, and people will come up to me, and my client will say, well, what do you think of this one? And I'm like, it's not balanced. It's not balanced. And deprivation is not a solution, okay? Because deprivation is punishment, and that is not what it is. God did not make bad food, okay? There is a place for a bag of potato chips. There really is, okay? It's just not on your plate every day, if you can help it, right? So it's really about homeostasis, okay? And homeostasis is a balance, right? It's the balance within all your physical systems, okay? And regulating your systems so that your body can maintain stability. And I think that's what we all strive for. I just met a new gal the other day who's running her first marathon tomorrow. And that is not my dream, okay? I'd love to be the best pickleball player in the world, but I don't put enough time into it, so that's not happening either. But her journey of fueling her body has led her to qualifying. She had to change her diet. She had to change how she managed her food and her intake and her exercise routine. She had a goal. Okay, my goal for all of you is that for you to wake up every day and give yourself permission to not only love your body, but to serve your body, right? To serve your body well with the foods that actually fuel your body, okay? So, you know, what kind of foods are those? What kind of foods are going to balance your gut? Well, here's a sad story, okay? And we all should know about it. I think we do know about it. I don't know. Our food sources today versus when we all were growing up are very different. Okay, we don't eat seasonally anymore. I can remember I was the one assigned to grocery shop with my mom every Saturday morning, and it was iceberg lettuce or iceberg lettuce, right? You didn't have arugula and all the fancy greens, okay? You had broccoli and cauliflower every other night. That was on my table. And my mom was smart enough to actually buy frozen vegetables instead of canned, except for LaSoir peas. She loved those. I don't know why. But nevertheless, you know, we didn't have the choices that we have today. I don't know that eating strawberries in February that were shipped from South America or from California, if they are growing then, I don't think they are, is really the best food choice for us. And yet we do, I do. But eating seasonally, eating whole foods, you know, there's this whole debate about organic food. Sure, if the whole world got to eat organic food, that would be awesome. But 99% of the world does not get to eat organic food because it's they can't afford it. It's out of reach. So I purposely don't eat organic food because a lot of my clients can't afford it, and I don't want to preach something that they can't afford, okay? So how do we then fuel our bodies if our food sources are contaminated? And they really only started getting contaminated back in 1992 with the invention of glyphosate, which was, you know, out there being sprayed on crops to get rid of all the insects. And then they learned that it dried the crops efficiently and quickly so that we could harvest more. And what's happened now is that we have become susceptible to all of these foods that have glyphosate in them. And I'm not going to go off on a tangent like that, but we have to be aware that our food sources, even from local farmers, aren't as clean as we'd like to think, and we're also not getting all the nutrients that we're getting. So I am a convert to supplements. I'm a convert. I'm a convert to having a super greens energy supplement that has pre and probiotics because we need to begin to heal our guts, right? So there are lots of them out there. But you want to make sure that you find one with a pre and probiotic that actually lasts inside your gut. So many of them, which I'm not sure why they produce these, don't even make it to the gut. They're not alive. You want these enzymes, you want the bacteria to be alive in your gut, your microbiome, so it starts creating harmony. Okay, so for those of us who might have acid reflux, don't take the Tums. Go invest in a pre and probiotic. Give your tummy a rest. I have a suggestion. I'm happy to talk to you about that afterwards. But absolutely, get off the Tums. I mean, it has calcium, I know, but you can take other things for calcium. You can eat pre and probiotic foods, but I don't know how practical that is for everybody. I have a jar of low sodium sauerkraut in my refrigerator, and I happen to love sauerkraut, so that works for me. I'm not a kombucha person. I'm just not. You know, I'm not a kefir person. You know, I'm not some of these other things, but I like sauerkraut, but I don't eat it every day. I eat it when I remember, but I always take a pre and probiotic in the morning. And if you're going to drink coffee in the morning, have your pre and probiotic first. Okay, because the coffee, as delicious and as amazing as it smells and it can taste, it's acidic, and we are trying to neutralize our guts and create an alkaline gut, right? So if you start your morning off with 1 or 2 cups of coffee, I don't care if you put cream or not in it, I don't care if you put sugar in it. I do care, but you know, the point is it's the acidic intensity of the coffee that interferes with your happiness quotient in your tummy. Okay, so every time you're eating something, you need to think about balance. You need to think about, how is this serving my gut? How am I going to wake up tomorrow? Am I going to sleep tonight? Are my muscles going to respond to the exercise that I am going to partake in? Am I going to have clarity when I go into that business meeting, or when I meet my friends for lunch, or when I have my grandchildren over? You know, everything is regulated by what we feed and fuel our bodies. So to live within all the seasons of our lives, it's funny, the one thing that we don't do well as we age as women, because for some reason a lot of us are always thinking about weight, we don't feed ourselves enough protein. Protein should be doubled. I'm pretty convinced that most everybody in this room, not everyone, but most everybody, is not eating enough protein. Protein is how you build muscle. Protein is also how you lose weight, you know, and you need to have the protein inside your body so that you can absorb the nutrients. And most times, if you're only eating protein, you're not going to build the muscles. You need the fiber, you need the complex carbs, you need the fruits and veggies, right, where the fiber comes from, right? So it's about balance. Have your plate, right, and instead of having 2 or 3 ounces of protein, get 6. And while you're snacking, you have some protein, you know, whether it's a handful of nuts with some dried fruit, or a pear, or an apple, or a clementine, because this is seasonal now, right? I'm not saying grab the strawberries. Have some protein with your snacks. Doesn't need to be a lot, but it carries you through, right? We don't want to be hungry. We want to make sure that we have this equilibrium within our sugar, right? And so if we are continually balancing our bodies with our fuel, with protein, the sugar lows and the sugar highs don't exist, okay? So we want to think about what we're eating. Listen, the other night, or the other day, I decided to make a turkey and Swiss sandwich. I had this beautiful bread I just bought. I don't usually eat gluten, but it looked so yummy. It was seeded, it was yummy. I'm like, I'm gonna try this. And I made that, and I loved it. And then I made 2 pots of bolognese sauce. I'm Italian, what the heck. And I decided I was gonna have bolognese with pasta. Not gluten-free pasta, I was going big. I was gonna have the regular pasta, yummy pasta. And the next day I woke up and I was all inflamed because gluten doesn't like my body, okay? It was just another affirmation that I know what to do, but I also know that I won't be eating gluten pasta or pasta with gluten or bread anytime soon. I enjoyed it. I loved that sandwich that I had. I love that pasta bolognese. That's my meal. If I'm on death row and I've committed murder, I'm not asking you to make it. I will ask for the ingredients and I will make it, but that is my meal. I love that. But I don't eat it every day. I eat it on occasion. And that is really my message, right? It's about occasional eating, no guilt, lots of grace, and fueling your body with foods that serve you, right? So there is this little helpful handout, and I laughed this morning because Mark offered to print them for me, which was awesome. And I realized the number one thing I talk about with my clients is hydration, and it's not on this list. Can you imagine? I'm like, how did that happen? I said to Madeline, I'm like, as I'm hydrating myself, right? And hydration isn't just water, by the way. It's electrolytes. It's vitamins, okay? You see lots of drinks out there that offer these things, but you don't want to use the ones that have sugar. So do your due diligence, right? Look at the ingredients. Don't make yourself crazy, but know the information that you have is power, right? Power to feel better, power to heal yourself, so you can heal the generations before and after. Thank you so much for your time.
So I know we're running over, but I just want to say a few thank yous before we leave the room. First and foremost, again, thank you, Hillary and Lisa. Wonderful, wonderful spending time with you this morning. I also want to thank each and every one of you because we don't gather like this as frequently as we should. And so thank you for taking the time to be with all of us today. And I hope that you'll come back and participate in other programs. Again, thank you, Mary Lauren Factora, for the tea setup from Bigelow, and Lisa for the food from Catch a Healthy Habit. Please help yourself. We might have some paper plates in the back. Take food home with you because it will go bad otherwise. And we do need to say thank you to Elaine Kelly and Danielle King and Ethan Kantorovich for running such a wonderful program. And I do also want to thank both Virginia Cargill and Cecily Stranahan, a couple board members who are here this morning and put up with me. So I'm going to close out as we do at every single session with an expression that we say before we go on our way. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be safe. May you be peaceful and at ease until we meet again. Have a great weekend, everybody.